Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new series of podcasts called Ireland Speaks. I've only done a couple of these in my time. The world has changed radically since I did my last one. We all know what's occurred. My name is Alan Cook. I'm a writer and a poet, philosopher, and many other things besides, a lover of nature and a worker in nature. Today, I have a sort of a new season starting because I think it's important to speak about things going on in the world, also the qualities that we need to try and manage and hold on to while the world is changing so radically. I have a friend of mine here called Ralph Hull, multifaceted, talented individual. He had been a Spitfire builder and engineer, Spitfire airplanes that is. He's a bit of a mystic and a very intelligent humanist and has lots of different opinions and passions about nature and the world. So I thought he'd make a very interesting subject for this new season of Ireland Speaks, my podcast of interesting cultural figures in Ireland speaking about things going on in the world. So I want to introduce Ralph. Hello, how you doing?
Hello, Alan. Nice to be here.
On this sort of burgeoning spring evening here in the rugged, elemental, burn, stone-filled, ghost-laden, historically dark and transcendent west of Ireland. So I just want to start off, Ralph, with you telling me a bit about your history, a little bit of your biography, and also the thing I found quite interesting, one of your aspects was the fact that you made planes and you repaired these planes, and just give people a background of where you came from and how all that began, if you can.
Well, as you can tell by my accent, I originally come from the north of Ireland, and my mother was from County Cavan, Ballyconnell, County Cavan, and my dad was from Lisburn. And I was born in 1945, which makes me a bit of an oldie. And I've been pretty well around the world. I spent early years as a young man in the military as a soldier. Then I went to Canada and fixed bush planes and worked on airliners. Played a lot of music out in Canada. Communed a lot with nature in Canada, did a lot of camping out there, picked up a lot of Native American Indian culture and ideals as regards how we should deal with nature. Came back to the UK in the 80s and started my own little business restoring vintage airplanes, and ended up rebuilding submarine Spitfires, dragging stuff that was brought out of the jungles and deserts of the world and put in the back in the air.
Now, I want to cut in there for a second because most people in the modern world, this is not to denigrate modern working world, working IT jobs or accountancy or teaching or civil servancy, or some of them might be in the military, obviously, but it's very unusual, and almost I have this romantic notion of you actually building that style, that old style airplanes. I haven't met a person like you before. You'd only hear about someone like you in a movie or read in a book, but to have a living person who's been close to that kind of type of engineering and such a symbolic image of the wars and another era, basically, that you cross-section between now and then. You have a sort of, you touch on different points of history in terms of that those aircraft represent a certain period of time. And the physical hands-on aspect is what I'm interested in, of the engineering and building of these things. It's very unusual to meet someone like you in this era who does that kind of work. And so was this something that became your passion, or did you have a knack for it? Or how did this actually occur that became your destiny for a long period of time?
All I ever wanted to do from a child onwards was to fix airplanes. I remember actually the earliest memory I have is lying in a crib. I was very, very young, and being woken up by my parents because my dad had come home and he had got a what we would call a mobile, or a mobile of little airplanes on strings hanging, and this was hung over the crib, and I was told that these were Spitfires. I think that they could have been anything. But I was enthralled as this child with these little airplanes spinning around over my crib. And funny enough, after the Second World War, my dad was lucky enough to get a job as a security guard on an airfield where all the old wartime wrecks and aircraft damaged in combat, they were actually dumped there as scrap because they were too badly damaged or were obsolete. And as 2 and 3 year old child, I used to toddle amongst these huge canyons of wrecked airplanes and gather up little nuts and bolts, and I was just totally intrigued by this. So I spent very early years of my life just amongst old airplanes, and I decided early on that I wanted to go travelling. I wanted to get out and see the world. And I used to get on my little bike when I was about 13 or 14. I used to ride, as you can tell by my accent, I'm from the north. And I used to ride to this little spot of high ground where I could overlook Loch Ness and overlook Belfast Lough. And in those days, the ships were coal-fired. And I used to watch the smoke from the funnels until they disappeared over the horizon, because it would get smaller and smaller with the curvature of the earth, believe it or not. And I used to say, one day I'll be on one of those ships. And so, yeah, I travelled the world. I basically chased airplanes all around the world.
Wow. And it's funny because I can see the images in my mind of you telling those stories. And it's like the hero's journey, isn't it? For those who studied any basic archetypal psychology, Joseph Campbell and stuff, which started me on my journey of having a different perception of the world other than the norm, what you were told it was. It was something completely different. We'll get to that later. But the imagery of it's the young boy standing at the precipice of the known and dreaming into the unknown and seeing what's out there. And you really did go out there then, because you travel different continents and you were in the army, and yet the plane or flight or that vehicle, which has such a romantic, I think, connotation. This piece of machinery which goes up above the earth and brings you to foreign lands and distant cultures and places never seen. Up until that point, we hadn't seen a lot of these places. It wasn't possible to maybe have the ocean liners in such quick time. So what was the next phase then for you, coming from the boy into the young man, teenager, to become on that road? What was the point that slipped you onto that path?
Okay, so I decided that the only way I could be around airplanes was to join the Royal Air Force. And I went, unbeknownst to my parents, I actually went to the Royal Air Force recruiting office in Victoria Street in Belfast in those days.
What year was that?
Oh my God, 60...
Early 60s.
61 maybe? Yeah. 61. Anyway, I applied to go into the Royal Air Force as an apprentice, and I would learn to fix airplanes. And I was accepted, and I passed my medicals and my aptitude tests and was accepted to go to Halton, which is no longer in existence, I don't think, anymore. It was RAF Halton, was where all the apprentices went. And the last hurdle was actually getting my parents to sign the consent forms.
How old were you then?
14.
You were only 14 then?
I was only 14.
Oh my God.
Right.
Something like God. Think of 14-year-olds now. Anyway, go on.
Okay.
No offense to 14-year-olds.
I was 14, so I came home with these stack of forms to mum and dad and said, look, can you sign these? And they freaked out. Especially my mother. My mother, bless her, God love her, she was such a protective woman. She didn't let the rain fall on me, really, which was a double-edged sword, really, you know. But she wouldn't sign the forms. And that scuppered my whole chance of an apprenticeship in the Royal Air Force.
Wow.
And sadly enough, my mother, only sort of 3 or 4 years later, my mum died. She died of leukemia. And I was still a youngster, really. And I'd finished tech college by this time. And I went back to the Royal Air Force. And by this time they said, no, you're too old now for an apprenticeship. So we can't offer you a position. So I did some research and found out that if I joined the army, I could work on military aircraft because they were now having the fledgling Army Air Corps, as it was called then. It started around 1957, I believe. And I thought, oh, I can work on airplanes if I join the army. So I joined the army.
Isn't it interesting, as a segue here for a second? Most modern structures now for younger people, it's about getting something that makes the most money.
Mm-hmm.
And there's you following a passion, and you haven't mentioned money once.
Well, we were mostly just broke anyway.
I know, but just the fact that most people, a lot of young people now make choices around what's going to pay me the highest value and economically so I can be in the world. You were just, maybe it was a different world obviously, but you're being guided or directed towards this thing, this idea of working on these crafts, and it was embedded very deeply somehow in you. So, and it's interesting to hear the story of someone following their passion, basically, because that's rare these days. Anyway, so go on. You got in then that time around.
Yeah, I joined the army and was guaranteed training as an aircraft engineer. But what they tell you is that once you join the army, the first thing you are is a soldier. Then you're a technician or a craftsman, secondly. So they teach you to be a soldier. In the case of joining a technical corps, I was in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. Really, the only thing they really taught us about being a soldier was how to defend ourselves and how not to go out stupid and get killed. Because if we went and got killed, then they've just wasted a bunch of money training us, and we go and do something really stupid and get our heads shot off. So we were not combat troops by any stretch of the imagination, although we ended up in combat areas. But our remit was to repair damaged aircraft. And so that's how I spent 6 years of my life travelling the world with the army.
And how was that to come from small town in a time when there were people who travelled, obviously, but so much easier today to do that kind of jumping around the world, but it would have been much more sort of adventurous and heroic a little bit to kind of go, right, I'm suddenly in what places you're in, like name it, Indonesia?
I was in Borneo, I was in Malaya, or it's now called Malaysia. Brunei, which I think the richest man of the world lives in Brunei, the Sultan of Brunei. I was in Germany, I was in Norway. I got around the fairways. And what can you say? It was an education, real education.
Were you aware of how it was changing you, or were you so focused on continuing to sort of follow that path of airplanes? But you're living your life now as a young man, free from, small town living. So how did that free you up in a way? Or did you feel freer?
Oh, I felt very free. Actually, if we can sort of backtrack a wee bit, when I was at school in the north of Ireland, our teachers used to tell us, now, you got to work real hard because the English are all smarter than you. So if you go over there, they'll laugh at you. And this was actually quite widespread. So when I joined the army and got a ticket to go on a boat to England, I didn't know what I was going into. I thought I was going into a superhuman race of these smart people who would laugh at poor old kid from Northern Ireland, And anyway, I got to my training depot in Berkshire, and I was stuck in a platoon with 36 other young men from all over the UK. Actually, one or two from other sort of Commonwealth countries, and pretty soon discovered that nobody had a monopoly on common sense. We were all stupid-year-old 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. And once I got that through my head, well then, yeah, it was very liberating. And the world was my oyster, so to speak. We were up for adventure, really.
Did you have a knack, do you think, with your hands with engineering, with that kind of? There's a specific type of brain, I think, that is able to solve problems in mechanisms. And I've met certain people. There's another guy I know who's an exceptionally good car mechanic. He just has a thing, an instinct for the machines, like a living organism to him. Tell me, as an airplane maker and engineer, what do you feel about that?
I feel like each aircraft's got a soul. It doesn't matter where I was looking after a military helicopter. It didn't matter in later years when I was looking after jumbo jets for an airline, each aircraft has got its own soul, its own character. And you get to know it. And you get to trust it. It talks to you.
In what way does that manifest itself, though? If you're finding a problem with an aircraft that you're trying to tune into your instinct about it, is that part of your experience as well, or what is it?
I've used instinct in the past, but generally it's just hard-nosed knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
If I've got a system, the fuel or hydraulic system problem, I will troubleshoot that problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a doctor. You go to see a doctor with something wrong, and he or she tells you what ultimately is the matter with you. It's not much different with a piece of machinery, really.
And did you ever feel a sense of nervousness around someone getting into this aircraft to fly it, and partly reliant on your capability to keep this thing?
Oh yes.
Was there any times when you come, I hope this holds together? Because it's not a purpose. I don't know. Is that a bit of a dark question?
No, it's a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
That was hammered into us in the military. Yeah, and in fact, in the Army Air Corps at the time, if you fixed an airplane, you were the first person who went in the test flight.
That makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So you would go up with the pilot to do an air test, no matter what. So
wow,
that kind of ensured that you did your job right anyway. But then, if someone was of the mindset where they had to have that hanging over their head to do their job right, they shouldn't be in that job in the first place. It comes as your nature to do your job correctly.
And when did you develop confidence around those skills, or was it there intrinsically?
I think
you know what I mean.
I think the embryonic confidence was there. It just had to be encouraged. It had to be
practiced.
Yeah,
exactly. Like anything.
At the end, I would have basically worked on any aircraft, and been quite happy to sign out any forms or logbooks with my signature saying that what I'd done was safe, and it would go wherever it was supposed to go, and it would come back again.
Did you end up being around those aircraft during a time of conflict?
At one stage.
What was that? What war was that? Or what
that was in Borneo in the early 65, 66.
And what was going on there? Was it a civil war or something? Or?
No, it wasn't. It was a European extension of sort of Vietnam, because to the north of us, Vietnam was going on. And British, I was part of 26th Commonwealth Brigade, and that encompassed British, New Zealand, and Australian soldiers. And we were fighting supposedly communist guerrillas in Malaya and Borneo. So it was a sort of a mini Vietnam, if you like. And that was the only time that I spent 3 years in that situation, or the best part of 3 years. And that was the only time I saw conflict.
Did that affect you? Did it change your life a little bit, or
big time?
Because you're seeing, like anybody, the brutality of war.
You see, we see. I'm a non-violent person. I actually abhor violence. That may sound like a contradiction in terms saying, well, the guy's been in the army. But when you're 18 and you join the army, you go for a laugh. You don't go to kill people. You know what I mean? I wanted to see the world, wanted to travel, wanted to do my engineering, and I would sort of go where the wind would take me. And in this case, it landed me in a war zone. So I dealt with that as best I could. And I saw a lot of things that revolted me, which was life-changing.
Do you feel that the youth, I don't know why I keep going back to this, it's coming up in me, that the youth today, non-judgment at all, those visceral experiences which are less common now, really in reality, thankfully, I think, for now, I know there's stuff going on in the world right now, are we better protected against that? Or, as I heard a quote recently, the stuff that a man goes through, that the Heart used to do, is what makes him a man. So, I'm not advocating war or going to war. I talk a lot about initiation and the thing you need to push through something to make you grow. And do you look back on that and realise that it sort of was the making of it as much as you would never wish to have seen some of the stuff you've seen?
Yes, absolutely. My philosophy is I wouldn't want any child of mine to be in the military to go to war to fight anyone. We shouldn't be fighting anyone anywhere. That's my philosophy. It's a sad fact of human nature that we thrive on war. I won't go into the politics of that, but I think there's a lot of money made from war.
Well, there's never been a war that has a person that said, well, we don't have the money to go to war.
Well, of course you've got the money to go to war.
Yeah, and we know that.
Yeah.
I
actually joke nowadays when people say, well, what are we doing out in Southeast Asia? And I would say, almost tongue-in-cheek, but not quite, that I was fighting for Shell Oil, BP, Dunlop Rubber Company, biofuel.
They were your sponsors.
Yeah, they were my sponsors. Those were the people I was fighting for. And nothing has changed. All the poor troops and people who have fought in Iraq, in Afghanistan and places like that where we shouldn't be in the first place, those people are fighting for large corporations too.
So you came back probably with a huge, vast belt of experience of your craft, of building craft. So you came back to Northern Ireland.
I did indeed.
And it was at the time when the fan was being filled.
Yes.
With shit.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you came back not innocent. So how was your instinct about coming back to another place that was very heavy down with?
But I didn't know that the trouble was going on in Northern Ireland. You see, in those days there was no internet, there was no mobile phones, there was nothing. I got the occasional letter from my poor old dad. He didn't know from month to month if I was alive or dead, because just there was no communications in those days. And I came back to Northern Ireland looking forward to coming home, and was shocked to find what was going on. My sister worked in Belfast at the time. She worked at the airport, my younger sister. So I felt a responsibility toward her safety in the middle of what was going on in Belfast at the time. I was very saddened. I didn't want to be part of that at all.
So what happened?
What happened?
Yeah, what did you do?
Well, my sister, she went to Canada. She and her boyfriend at the time decided to go to Canada, and bless her, I think it was 48 years ago last week that she flew out of Shannon on an old Boeing 707 on her way to Canada, not knowing what awaited her fate. Not long after, I flew out of Belfast on a Boeing 707 going to Canada, where I started a new life in Canada. Again, doing my aircraft engineering.
So you were being led in a way by your passion, still, to different countries. It was leading you out into all these very extraordinary adventures and places. And I want to bring in the connection of nature now, because we talk quite a bit about nature in our own conversations. And I'm thinking Canada. I'm thinking, did you spend time out there in that vast, muscular, godlike landscape? Like, were you starting to move into those places aside from the work you were doing? Or,
oh yeah.
So tell us.
Yeah. Well, the whole place just was good for my soul.
Why?
Well, you could be totally alone. You go out in nature, and I've been in places where if anything happened to you, if you hadn't told someone you were going there, they'd never find you.
It's so vast out there.
It's so vast. And nature's pretty rugged. Some of the woodland and the forests out there is pretty rugged, hostile places to be, but beautiful places to be. And, I've gone on camping trips by myself, hunting trips by myself. Just rattle a few pots and pans out in the woods, make sure you don't run foul to a brown bear or a grizzly looking after her cubs or something. You'll have had some great times out in the woods.
So you have this young boy looking at the smoke plumes, and now he's looking at the Rockies and all these vast places. And was it something bigger inside you was growing? That you weren't just that lad anymore for Northern Ireland. You were changing. You were like, what was leading you? I always find this very interesting. I talk a lot about being led by your soul, and it's an invisible force. Is there a voice in you that was bringing you to these places? Or why suddenly then did you want to be in nature more and more? Is it because of what you'd seen, or it was giving you something?
Well, as growing up in the north of Ireland as a kid, I roamed the hills and the woods and fished and climbed and fell out of trees because I was blessed. I grew up in nature.
Yeah.
In the military, I spent more time outdoors than I did in. And I just had a chance to see other aspects of nature, especially in Southeast Asia. And of course, Canada was just another chapter. Like, for instance, the Canadian climate, the winter climate is incredibly harsh. And that was just an experience. That's an invigorating experience to be out in some of the winter storms that we had. I'll tell you a wee story. I remember one year I was in Nova Scotia at this time, and it was bitter cold winter, and we'd had a lot of snow, and the snow froze on top. You could walk on top of it. And I had a snowsuit and snow boots on, and I went out walking this day on top of this iced snow, this glare ice on the snow. And the wind was blowing in my face, and it was blowing powdered snow at, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, just blowing along. And it wasn't sticking to the ground because it was sliding on the ice, the snow was. And I was walking past the tops of fir trees, like spruce trees.
Way.
Oh yeah, I was maybe 8 foot up in the air.
Wow.
Snow. And there was this amazing golden sunset in my eyes. And the wind was coming from the sunset in my eyes. And I remember walking through this, and there's not a soul there except myself. And I remember thinking, I'll never forget this. To my dying day, I will experience this. I will remember this. Because that was just so magic.
And there's something about those moments that they're never the same until you're alone.
No.
Because you're separate from people, you're separate from the world, you're separate from your connection with a partner or a son, a daughter, or a group of friends. I feel the closest you come to yourself is when you're with yourself out in nature. And it's the most profound, neutral, divine space is you alone. And I'm thinking about some of your stories you've told. A lot of them were experienced with yourself, just you, nobody else. And those landscapes make it even more visceral, don't they? There's a difference between standing on a hill, and then, like you just said there, being in this massive winter forest in Canada. And the bigger and more symphonic it is, the larger the effect it has, and the closer I think it brings it to yourself. It's not for the faint-hearted, though, is it? Really, a lot of the people in the modern world now have real issues. Look at the lockdown, for example. We'll jump ahead for a bit. How did you deal with the psychology of, well, isolation or limitation, or how did you find that period of time?
Well, I'll give you the insight. It's kind of ironic, but my dear wife and I, we both caught COVID. We didn't catch it in England. We actually caught it on the boat between Rosslare and Pembroke Dock, because we'd come here for a holiday. Because County Clare, we love County Clare. And we had come here for a wee holiday, and that was in March of 2020, just before the fan went schizoid.
Yeah.
And we ended up with COVID, both of us. We were told by radio programs and stuff at the time in Britain that you mustn't go to your doctor, don't go to hospital, you can't see anybody, and certainly as far as Boris Johnson was concerned, if you're over 70, stay home and cocoon or die, whichever comes first.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I are both well over 70. So we were naturally frightened, because the governments had basically broadcast fear porn, as we now find out.
Yeah.
But at the time, no one knew or professed not to know how bad this virus was. Now, what saved us was we nursed each other. We had no treatment. We didn't go to any doctors. I got hold of a young locum, a lady doctor, who was so sweet and helped me, but it took me 3 days on the phone to speak to someone, because my wife had this dreadful cough. And she prescribed some stuff that, not for COVID, I must admit, it was the byproduct of this, what she prescribed would actually stop suppressed coughing. It was actually codeine sulfate. And we got a prescription for that, which helped grace no end. And as we got a little stronger, we lived on the outskirts of a little town in Norfolk called Sheringham. And we weren't policed religiously like people were in the Midlands of England and even around here in Clare, from what I hear. You weren't being chased by police every 2 minutes. What are you doing out of the house? Or, And we actually found a beautiful little area, only about 2 miles from our home, which was out in the most beautiful piece of country. And there was a track that ran through a beautiful preserved church that was closed down. And we spent most of our time recuperating on walks in this beautiful countryside, because at that time there was the most glorious springtime.
That's right, yeah.
During the COVID time.
Yeah.
And there was no contrails. Yeah, it was wonderful.
There was no traffic.
Just sunshine, sunshine and us, and we never saw a soul.
I remember standing on the edge of Fanor, going for a swim, and I could hear my own breath. And it was like the first day of the world.
That's right.
It was like the world began again.
Right. That's correct.
And I didn't feel a sense of isolation, because I was close to nature. I worked in this retreat centre. And it was a glorious time, because we knew we weren't going to get bothered.
That's right.
There was people in cities and blocks of flats in different parts of the world who felt like they were in a microwave.
That's correct. Well, we were never there.
No. And so, profoundly enough, people got a real wake-up call about the necessity of the natural environment to keep the naturalness in your soul together, sane, basically, And that's why I was asking you, yourself and other people like me and stuff who have strong advocacy and philosophy around nature being the arbiter of everything, really. It was a relief in a way to be close to those places, and it reinforced my view that cities, as much as people like to be in cities and that's their prerogative, I couldn't call a place without nature home, because it's man's creation. are not the best part of his creation, you know.
No, I agree
So
with you. Yeah.
that's why I was asking. Obviously, you're quite comfortable in that. Isolation can for me be a subway in New York City, or a crowded room, or a loud pub. But once I step out and breathe out into that forest, or where I go cutting wood, I'm back home again.
Yeah, you're not isolated.
No,
not at all.
Now we're skipping around, but going back to the tag of your journey. So after that, when you came out of the Air Force, then is that when you decided to create your own company of airplane?
Yeah, I actually just.
What happened?
Actually, what happened was I was working for a big airline in Canada, and it was the start of all the massive layoffs and economic downturns.
What year was this?
This was
late 70s?
Early 80s.
Early 80s, okay.
Right. And we decided at the time to come back to the UK. Reluctantly, but we said it was the best thing to do. For various reasons, not the least of which was the education of our own daughter, because at that time, the education system in Canada was... We didn't use the word woke in those days, but it was headed that way, as regards how they were treating children. The philosophy of them was everyone's a winner and nobody ever loses, so you don't have to make the effort. So on sports day, everybody won, if you understand. So that's the sort of education system. There was no competition, and you know, we're little animals as human beings. We need competition. We need disappointment. We need goals to work to. You know, you got to work towards something. Everything. Otherwise, we just slip into mediocrity. Really.
Well, there's huge medicine in failure. I've had plenty of it in my own life, and if there's gold, if you can distill past the heartbreak and the shattering, there's gold. It's a whole school of philosophy now. It's a whole school of transforming yourself from Jung to modern psychology to psychotherapy to nature-loving philosophers. All the gold is in those wounds, is in the men, and that's one of the things the world needs to face its own shadow right now. But if you're lucky enough to become awake to that, then you start, I think, trusting your instinct.
Sure.
Because it's honed through your experiences with nature. And if that becomes your educator, that becomes your master, that becomes your pilot, excuse the pun, your captain.
Sure.
So it's interesting to see you're moving around the world, different things going on in the world, different decisions based on practical realities. And then you're back in England, and then what happened?
Well, it's funny, I'd actually applied for a job in England before I left Canada, and spoke on the phone to these people. I won't name the organisation. And they said, yeah, brilliant. We come and see us as soon as you get here. We'll have a job for you. So I had a job lined up. So we came home, me and my wife and our daughter, young daughter. Went to these people and said, right, I'm here, guys. And they said, oh, sorry, we don't have a job for you anymore because we've had economic cutbacks, etc., etc. So I didn't have a work. So I actually went on I registered in what you would call, in English terms, the dole, unemployment. And I went into this unemployment office. I'd only been in there for a couple of weeks, and there was a sign up saying, wanted an engineer capable of working on Second World War historic aircraft, who can do compound curves and work double curved sheet metal and all this sort of good stuff. So I applied for it, and it was on the south coast of England. We were living in East Anglia at the time.
Right.
We were in Norfolk, and this was in Sussex. And so I went for this interview and saw this guy, and he and I got on very well. He was a very upbeat sort of character. But Alan, I got a pretty good sixth sense. My gut feeling is usually pretty good. And as much as I liked this man, I came away thinking, this guy is either independently filthy rich, or he's as mad as a hatter, and he's broke. And
it's not, just to intersect there, it's not the normal job you'd see in a place like that.
No.
In all honesty.
No. And in all fairness, in the place where I was interviewed, there was the most atmospheric. There was 3 Supermarine Spitfires dug out of the desert with battle damage.
Wow.
Sitting in this place waiting to be restored. So, like, being amongst that lot is like, it's incredibly atmospheric.
Now, just a segue again. Had you worked on Spitfires before this? So you hadn't worked on Spitfires? No. Okay.
But I'd worked on enough structural repair work and stuff, and the like of the structure of a Supermarine Spitfire is basic structure. There's no rocket science to it. But it's complicated and fiddly work. And they built those airplanes using techniques that we wouldn't use today because of mass production. And
was there a handcraft element to those, like a sort of
everyone was hand built. You wouldn't take bits from one and swap it and it would fit in another. We just wouldn't have them.
Wow. Yeah.
So anyways, to cut a long story short, I went working for this guy, and yeah, I had been right. Bless him, he was wildly enthusiastic, but broke. So some weeks we got paid and some weeks we didn't. Some weeks the checks bounced and some weeks they didn't. And we were living off our savings, basically. And I thought one day, well, I can't do any worse than actually go self-employed. So
how long had you been there at that place? A year?
About a year and a half.
Okay.
And I reluctantly decided that I had to go on my own. Otherwise I was going to starve to death. And I knew a gentleman who had he had a number of airplanes stored. Ironically, he had a Spitfire which he had just put back in the air and he had restored it himself. And ironically enough, it was an ex-Irish Air Corps Spitfire. It had actually operated out of Baldonnel in Dublin, because that was where the Irish Air Corps had their Spitfires. And the Irish Air Corps converted the Supermarine Spitfire to 2-seat trainers, so there were twin-seat Spitfires. Ironically enough, this man had one of these. He had also brought another old Mark 18 Spitfire out of India as a wreck. And I phoned him up one day. I said, look, you got that old Mark 18 Spitfire. How would you like to commission me to restore it for you? And he said, that's a good idea. I couldn't believe it. So
there began that road.
And I located my workshop back up in East Anglia and spent the next 36 years in that game. Travelling out to Canada again at times to help people out with Spitfire projects, travelling to United States and New York and Florida to help people with Spitfire projects.
So these were, non-commercial, as in these were hobbyists, people who might have had a couple of pounds in the bank, because you can't really be a hobbyist.
Oh, some of them had more than a couple of pounds in the bank, I can tell you, yeah.
And as you graduated into becoming very experienced with this particular model of plane,
yes,
did you find you fell in love with that plane, or was it just something that was...
I fell in love with the aircraft. Actually, I wondered about the aircraft because, I don't know. I had a thing about some of them because I came across instances where aircraft had been retrieved that people had been killed in. Even where human remains had been found inside the aircraft. I was vehemently opposed to restoring an airplane like that. I consider that should remain
sacrilege, sort of
buried. Yeah, you don't.
It's like restoring a coffin.
Yeah,
that someone had been in.
That's right, and you don't go making money on that sort of
thing. They're graves, really, aren't they?
They're graves of war graves. Yeah. So you don't go there. So that was my moral compass. I wouldn't be involved with restoring anything that someone had died in. So there's pitfalls along that road too.
So you had this huge experience, a long career, and we're going to park that for a second and talk about aliens and mysticism. Now, there might be a connection, maybe you have one, but you also lived close to these places where you started getting interested in research around beings from other places, other worlds. And we've had religion for thousands of years, which talks about divinity in terms of an otherness. So it's not that far of a stretch to move into the realm of entities that might communicate something. Or what started it? Was it because of airplanes or something? Or was it because how did those two worlds meet? Or did they meet, or was it just something that was always part of your interest in all things mysterious?
I was kind of interested from a youngster, Even now at home at night time, you hear that grown-ups talking around the fire.
Stories.
Stories and maybe conjectures saying, well, we can't be the only people here, if you know what I mean. There's got to be other worlds. But anyways, after I went to Canada in 74, I started hearing stories at some of the places I worked about people who had seen stuff, experienced stuff, what their families had seen, what their neighbours had seen. I was intrigued. I thought, I want to find out more about this. I got my hands on what books I could get at the time, but bear in mind that in the early days there wasn't much good material. There was a lot of pulp magazines and fear-mongering magazines about aliens from outer space and stuff. People like good horror stories and people like to frighten themselves. But I really wanted to find out. I thought, well, I want to find the truth. I really, really want to find the truth about this. So I started digging and I dug out what I considered at the time to be reputable reading material. And I started asking people for their stories. And then I contacted one of the very early UFO research groups, which was based in Arizona at the time, Tucson. It was called APRO. I ended up in Eastern Canada being a field investigator for them. So I met all kinds of interesting people in Eastern Canada. Heard many interesting stories. Met people who I considered to be delusional, but I also met some very sincere, dear people who were very far from being delusional and had very real experience. So that set me on the trail of basically UFO research. And I warn you, if you're going to get into this, it's all questions and not too many answers.
There's a quote from Shakespeare: "There's more in heaven and earth than you can dream of in your philosophy."
Absolutely.
I think it's beautiful to have a lot more questions than answers, isn't it?
It is.
It makes life interesting.
Oh, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the way the world is today, and the passions you've had, the experiences you've had, the interest that you've cultivated, the growth in your own spirit from taking big journeys and big leaps. Most people live sedate, safe lives, not to judge them. They stay on the one course because it's secure. And we know there's no things to security, and particularly now.
No.
Do you think, in your experiences of touching upon those worlds and the human world in your career and in the other world, what are the qualities? We've talked about this earlier on. I feel there's so much longing and loneliness and hurt and things that are missing and things that we need connection with again, tribally, societally, in masculinity and femininity, the basic tenets of existence, of sovereignty, of leadership. From your nearly 8 decades on the earth, what now? We know things are corrupted in the world, we know that. We don't need to name names, but what's the thing you think is most important right now that people need?
I think people need desperately to hang on to their humanity. There are all sorts of distractions around that would fool you into believing that for convenience sake you can be human 2.0, or you can be subhuman, or you can be transhuman, you can be have a computer chip in your brain or in your hand or whatever, and it's going to make life so convenient. I think this is a dreadfully, dreadfully dangerous place to be thinking that way. I think we need to really, truly figure out and go back and figure out who we really are. We're humans, we're men and we're women. We need each other. We need compassion, we need empathy. Because most people, in my view anyways, most people have been lured by the mythical, metaphoric 30 pieces of silver. They're told that they'll be happy with more possessions, they'll be happier with a newer car, they'll be happy with an electric car, they'll be happier with the latest iPhone, you name it. And really none of them are any happier because they go home and think, well, what have we bought this for?
Hasn't there been, I think, statistically, especially during after the lockdown, a lot increase in loneliness and anxiety and futility, and if everything's going up out of pocket, that people are getting now pulled all the time towards pressure just existing. And we should give ourselves permission to have more time to contemplate the idea of life itself.
Oh, truly, truly.
And I think it's one of the biggest tragedies of life that we are not given, our time is stolen from us by these other entities, other structures. Mm-hmm. And it's an insult to the soul to think that what they're telling you is more important, is so little in consequence compared to the idea of you standing with that sunset in Canada, or in another landscape where you're blown away by something you see, like a creature, or like today when I was visiting my friend in the hospital, there was a little white foal galloping around, doing his little maze. And all I kept thinking, like, look at that. He was sheer the exuberance of just spring and new life. He was galloping in the rhythm of divinity. He was just... Yeah. And how many people do you see now? Say someone goes into Aldi, and I sometimes park in Aldi and I watch people going back and forth, and it nearly breaks my heart. It's nothing to judge them. They're beaten down, they're dragging their heels. Their feet are not touching the earth. Their minds are contracted. And then you look at this foal. He has nothing in the world, but he has contact with everything at the same time. And all I've been trying to excavate from you is, what do you think we need to do right now, today, in this moment, as human beings? Ignoring the structure and just say, for me, it's language, how we speak to one another. But what do you feel when you walk outside the door? Is it kindness? Is it care? Is it love? Is it what's the quality, do you believe, that can bring us back home as a collective in these very troubled times?
I think care, consideration for each other.
Yeah.
How we treat each other. Now, this is, again, is a very complicated system, because you and I, I'm sure, go out and some days we meet people who are not having a good day.
Yeah.
And those people will be rude to you, they'll be nasty to you, they'll be arrogant. And you have to not rise to that. You have to think, well, this person... I don't know their life. I don't know their story. I don't know the pressures they're under. I don't know if they can afford a meal. I don't know if they can afford to pay their mortgage.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
No.
I think we have to quiet ourselves. We have to still our minds. And nature is the great giver. A wonderful gift. Mm. And people say, oh, you silly old so-and-so, you're out talking to the trees. Well, yeah, go out and talk to a tree. Because it's certainly not going to do you any harm.
Well, nature's 4 billion years old.
Yes.
And the download from nature is bigger than the download of an app.
Yeah.
What it has is an accumulation of its own self-created knowledge, which we have only touched upon their short blip of time here. Mm-hmm. And to even tap slightly into that, you're getting a download of something that has language and meaning beyond your small brain capacity. You might get a touch of it, you might get a scintilla of it. So when you see that sunset, or you go into an ocean, or you wake up and you hear the bird song, it's more than just how we've languaged it. Bird song. It's divinity.
It's a whole experience.
It's immortality. It's all of those experiences together.
Right.
So I guess we both agree on that. I always say, no matter what you're feeling in your life, keep going back to nature. An overused word, nature, to the source, where we come from, where we're going back to, where we evolved from. And
if I may interject here, Alan, there's going way back to my military days. They taught me something wonderful way back then, and I didn't realize how wonderful it was and how much it would stick with me for the rest of my life. One thing they taught me: never quit. Don't give up. Right? There's so many people throw the towel in and give up.
In everything.
And I hear tell of people committing suicide over...
Yeah.
My heart breaks when I hear tell of people who are on suicidal over inconsequential garbage. It's pressure brought on by somebody in a pinstripe suit, somebody in an office, somebody at the end of a phone. In the morning, nobody else is going to know about it. There's just going to be family members left devastated by someone's demise. And the very people who were creating the stress will put their hands in their pockets metaphorically and walk away whistling.
So this is what I'm talking about. I think of the word to weave communion. I do. We help each other here. You also create and carve beautiful objects and staffs and sticks. And then I go out sometimes and I bring you some wood from the forest that I cut, this lovely dry wood, and it's an exchange, and it keeps a communication of community. Community can be almost transitory. It doesn't have to be locked into a specific location. No. It can be transported from one person to another in a way, And I just feel all of these journeys and adventures, and we could have 4 hours of you talking about so many stories we can't share today, but it's a sense of, from your very broad and multifaceted life experience, we both are arriving at the same conclusion that there's something wrong with the world, that we can't solve it in the structures that are creating the problems.
No.
But we can solve it through the old is the new now. The necessity of community now, the necessity of the medicine of others, the necessity of kindness. As I always said, if you had a kid and you brought him up and he did nothing his whole life except but be kind, he will be a success in my world. Yeah. Because you don't need to go to Nepal with mala beads and strip naked to learn about kindness. Kindness is inbuilt into our nature. It's a choice, and it's and loyalty and the sovereignty that kindness brings. It always brings a return from the person who it was given to, the person giving it, and then the world around them as they walk away ripples outwards with that sort of thing.
I always say, if you want to change your situation, if you want to change the world, start changing your own attitude. Because the number of people say to me, well, I can't do anything. There's so much wrong with the world, but I can't do anything. What can I do? And I say, well, there is something you can do. You can start and change how you think.
Well, I always feel if there was only one conscious person left in the world, that would be enough to change the world.
That would be enough. It should be.
We have so many figures, non-political, the Mandelas and all these people who went through these massive alchemical journeys where greatness is thrust upon them, Muhammad Ali. And that one person rippled their echoes, and their voices rippled, not only in the present time, but echoes even today. We can return to those people to find a fundamental philosophy of rising above dark times, of taking on forces that are bigger than ours and conquering them, and therefore conquering that fear in ourselves. And a lot of the inward journey that's required, where does it start? It's the simple first step. If you had nothing and nobody right now in your life, just if you're close to a forest or close to an ocean, they say a man has to go and find a soul in the world. And that's partly what I feel in conclusion that you did. You went out in the hero's journey, which, for say just the masculine, there's obviously the feminine, the heroine's journey as well. You had to go and find your soul in the world. So you got all this tapestry of experiences and lives and loves and losses and skill sets and qualities And you come full circle now, and you come back to the fundamental thing of just being and living here in this part of the world. And you find there's so much more to learn.
You're learning every day.
So, Ralph Hull, engineer, mystic, alien investigator, woodcarver, journeyman, war hero, multi-continental traveller. I usually ask people this little questionnaire from the Proust questionnaire, which is a quick fire set of questions, so you don't have to think about too much, and I'll just fire them off.
All right.
What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Peace and quiet.
What's your greatest fear?
I don't think I have one.
What's the trait you most deplore in yourself?
Not speaking my mind at an earlier age.
What's the trait you deplore most in others?
Deviousness, lies.
What living person do you most admire?
Probably Gandhi. Oh, you mean living person?
Living person.
Gandhi's gone. Sorry about that. Let me think about that one.
We'll go on. We'll come back to that one.
Okay.
What is your greatest extravagance?
I don't have any at the moment.
What's your current state of mind?
Good.
What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Possessions.
On what occasion do you lie?
Never.
What do you most dislike about your appearance?
Getting older.
Which living person do you most despise?
Living person?
Yeah.
Oh, I could give you a list.
We'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
What's the quality you most like in a man?
Honour.
What's the quality you most like in a woman?
Nurturing.
What words or phrases do you most overuse?
What words or phrases?
Do you most overuse?
Well, probably, let's see.
Will we go on?
We'll go on with that one.
Who is the greatest love of your life?
My wife.
When and where were you happiest?
See, I've been happy in so many places. I couldn't give you one place.
Well, that's a good sign. Which talent would you most like to have?
Talent?
Yeah.
Clairvoyance.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
Be taller.
Stilts. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My engineering skills and my healing.
If you were to die and come back as a person or thing, what would it be?
Cat.
Where would you most like to live?
I think I'd like to live back in Southeast Asia.
What is your most treasured possession?
My guitar.
What do you regard as the lowest depth of misery?
Turmoil in your mind.
What's your favourite occupation?
Helping others, actually.
What's your most marked characteristic?
Bluntness.
What do you most value in friends?
Honesty.
Who are your favourite writers?
Writers?
Just a couple, even one off the top of your head.
I like David Icke.
Who's your hero of fiction?
Let me see. I think Mr. Spock.
Which historical figure do you most identify with?
Which?
Which historical figure?
I've never really thought much about this.
Well, you mentioned Gandhi.
Yeah, I think Gandhi.
Who are your heroes in real life?
I don't have any anymore.
What are your favourite names?
Pass.
What is it that you most dislike?
What is it I most dislike?
Yeah.
War and violence.
What's your greatest regret?
I don't have any.
How would you like to die? No,
peacefully.
What is your motto?
Do unto others as you would like to be treated, or as you like to be done as well.
Well, Ralph Hull, that's a huge amount of food for thought. I think we could have went down for a good or long one because there's so many other aspects of your life. Very interesting individual. And this is Alan Cook here saying thank you to Ralph for his input and insight and very, very tip of the iceberg biography of a very, so far, fascinating life. And I'm sure there's still many adventures to come. This is Alan Cook here again for Ireland Speaks. And check out my YouTube channel, Wild Irish Poet. And here's to another episode. I'll see you soon, and take care of yourselves and take care of others.